Hello, this is a little video on Excel tables. It's the third in a series of workshops that the Diocese of Joliet is presenting for parish business managers and parish staff. I'm Sharon Hauk. I work here at the Diocese in information technology, and this workshop covers creating Excel tables, looking at data in Excel as data, sorting, filtering, and doing some analysis with tables. Okay, let's take a look at this first sheet that I have here and do a little bit of review. First, I want to remind everyone how to widen all the columns at once to a basically, a just fit kind of widening. Here's how you can do it. In the upper left-hand corner between the A and the 1, you can click to highlight the entire sheet, and then put your cursor between any two column headings, double click, and that will have widened all of the columns in your sheet to what Excel thinks is the best fit. Now let's remember how to get to the bottom right corner of your data. Excel will do its best to find the bottom right corner, and I'm going to do Control and then the End key, E-N-D, Control, hold that, tap End, and it takes you to the bottom right corner of your data. So if you look, this actually is the last cell in my data. Now I'm going to do a Control Home, and that'll put me at the top left corner of my data. This can be very helpful, for example, if we want to highlight this data. So I'm going to press Control End to get to the bottom right corner. And now to highlight this data, I'm going to hold the Shift key, which will do the highlighting for me, and press Control Home. And now I will have highlighted all of my data. This is very helpful if we want to create a table. So that's what I'm going to do now. I've got all of this data highlighted. It's about, let's see how many rows we've got here. We've got 75 rows. This is a header row that has the column headings in it. So I actually have 74 rows of data here. In terms of vocabulary, in data terms, that's called 74 records. And then one row that is my header row. All right, that's all highlighted now. So let's make a table. This is not the same thing as a table in Word, which basically mostly just looks pretty. In here, there's a certain aesthetic. Yes, it's going to look pretty, but also Excel gives us a bunch of features when we format as table. So first of all, where is it? It's on the Home tab on the ribbon, right here, Format as Table. And you can pick whatever look you want. I'm going to go with this blue, and it's highlighting the data that it thinks that I want. I know that's what I want. I highlighted it myself first, and it's asking me, does my table have a header? And yes, it does. So that's checked, and I'll say okay. All right, now it's blue. It looks lovely, but much more importantly, now we have these little drop downs here. So those arrows showed up. What do they do for us? Well, first of all, we can sort with that. So I'm going to sort this, let's say, by cost. I'm going to click the little down arrow and say, let's sort this column smallest to largest. Now, if you've worked with Excel for a long time, you might have seen the occasion where you were doing some kind of sort and accidentally messed up your data because you sorted one column and it didn't also sort all the columns next door. So, for example, everybody's zip code got messed up or something like that. When you've created a table in Excel, that will never happen. I sorted this by cost, and each of these rows is sort of sacrosanct. It will never get separated from, this ID and case number and so on across is going to stay together whenever you do any sorting in a table. That's a big plus. Okay, the other thing that we can do with these little drop-down arrows that Excel created is filter. So I'm going to take a look at the date, for example, and say, well, maybe I don't want everything. Maybe I just want January of last year. And I'll say okay. And that filtered. Now, how do I know that it filtered? Well, in the lower left-hand corner, you have a visual clue. It says 23 of 74 records found. I know that I have a filter applied. Also, on this little arrow, there's sort of a coffee filter look to it now. Well, I can go back to that and say select everything, or I could also say clear the filter from date and say OK. Now look in the lower left-hand corner. There is no such thing as 23 of 74 records. I don't have a filter applied right now. Okay, I want to also show you that you could filter more than one column. So let's go back here and say, you know what? I just want January of last year. So now I have filtered it by date. And then I also only want, and this is some fictitious data that was generated and then changed a bit from the open data portal of the city of Chicago. So this is some crimes data that's available to the public. Okay, so I changed some of the dates, and the cost is completely fictitious and etc. But that's where this basic data came from. I'm going to say, fine, we'll sort by January of last year in terms of the date, but also, filter rather. Also, let's filter this by just grocery stores. I just want to see about grocery stores in January of last year. There's my filter on date as well as on location description. And you can see in the lower left-hand corner now it says 8 of 74 records were found. Okay. If you want to clear any filters that you have created, and this is an important thing because when you're looking at how many, you don't accidentally want to have a filter applied and not realize it. Here's the best way to know that you've gotten rid of all the filters. Go up to the Data tab and do Clear right there. That clears all your filters. Check the lower left-hand corner. Yep, nothing's saying anything about filtering. No little coffee filters on any of these. I'm good. My data is currently not filtered. Okay, so the basic upshot of creating a table in Excel is that yes, it looks pretty, but at the same time you have sorting features. You can sort by any of the columns, and you can do filtering by columns, even more than one column. Okay, now let's take a look at something that we saw the other day in the workshop, and I'm going to use it to demonstrate another thing. I'm going to go to sheet 2 here, and let's remember something called flash fill. So when you're dealing with data in Excel, sometimes the data isn't separated in the way that you want it, or even combined in the way that you want it in terms of the columns. So this is a review of flash fill. I'm going to say, actually, I sure would like to see the last name pulled out in its own column. So I am going to type the last name here. And this only works in the newer versions of Excel, by the way. Then I'm going to click out of it and back into that cell, go to the Home tab, and look for the Fill choice on the ribbon. And on that drop down, I'm going to say Flash Fill. Excel is smart enough to try to fill in the same pattern that I have demonstrated for it. It's not perfect. You need to run your eye over it and make sure that it didn't goof up. For example, if there was somebody with junior or a middle initial or something, sometimes that sort of change in the pattern of the original data might mess up the flash fill. But for the most part, it's really very effective. Okay, now I want to use this to create a table and show you some stuff that has to do with more sophisticated sorting. Now, last time what we did was we said Control End would get us to the bottom left-hand corner. Then we did Shift and Control Home, gets us to the bottom right corner. Shift Control Home gets us to the top left corner and highlights our data. But I'm going to show you something even easier. As long as your data is sort of one chunk and doesn't have a bunch of holes in it, you can just have your cursor somewhere in the data and then go up to Format as Table. Pick one of these colors, and it will do its best to highlight what it thinks you want. And it's pretty good at it. So this might have saved me some time. And yes, my table has headers. You always want a header. Those column headings are important for what you're trying to do with a table. So have those and say OK. All right. So now I have a little table of data. And let's take a look at some more sophisticated sorting. Let's say I want to sort this by last name, but within that by first name. Okay, I'm going to start here and say let's sort alphabetically by last name. So far, so good. But within the last name, the first name is not sorting as well. So let's sort by first name. Oh, well, now that goofed up the last name. So how do you go about doing sorting that involves more than one column? It's easy. On the Home tab, we're going to click on Sort and Filter and say Custom Sort. This allows us to stack up more than one thing in terms of the sort order. So I'm going to say first, sort by last name, and then I'm going to add a level and say within that, sort by first name. Very common thing to do. I'll say OK. And now this is sorting by last name, and within that, by first name. So where was that again? Just have your cursor in the table, and then on the Home tab, go over to Sort and Filter and say that you want to do a custom sort. Then add the levels that you want. Okay. Now let's take a look at something that can be helpful with regard to the filter. Another filter thing I want to show you. Let's filter the RSVPs and just say I want to know who's coming. Yes. These are the people that RSVP'd yes. Now, by the way, at this point, I can actually just print this. I can say File, Print, and it's just going to print this filtered view, which can be very helpful. But also I want to show you that I could, if I wanted, and let's clear this filter so you can see the data again, I could actually just ask it to show me the blanks where I haven't gotten any RSVP yet. So I'm going to go here and say, you know what, I just want to see where it's blank. These are the folks that didn't RSVP yet. So that's a very common filtering technique to look for the blanks. All right, let's use sheet 3. We're going to be back to the data from the city of Chicago to take a look at some additional filtering on dates and then numbers respectively. Okay, I'm going to do Format as Table and pick one of these. I trust that it has gotten a hold of all of my data. Let's go down and check. Yep, it did. Yes, my table has headers. I'll say OK. Very good. Now let's take a look at some special filtering that we can do with a date field. So I'm going to click on the drop down next to date, and instead of using these little boxes to select something, I'm going to say, well, there's some date filters that are available to me. And I'm going to say, let's pick something like, and this is going to go off the screen, but trust me on this, there is a choice here that says this year. Okay, I have 40 of 74 records that were filtered by this year. So what I want to show you is that on this date filtering, you can say just show me all of the records that are for yesterday or last week. It's pretty sophisticated. All right, let's clear that filter and let's take a look at filtering a number. So on cost, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to use the boxes on cost because they're kind of all over the place. But this is a number field, that's vocabulary, by the way, for a column, that has filters associated with numbers. So I could say, show me all of the records where the cost does not equal something, or is greater than something, or is between two numbers. Let's look at that one. Oh, the top 10, that can be helpful. Let's do the between. Let's say, show me all the costs that are between $100 and $200. Okay, there, it filtered that. So the filtering that's available in a table is pretty sophisticated, especially when you're dealing with date or number columns. All right, let's take a look at some more general data considerations. What happens a lot of times is that people get some kind of an export, let's say, from a system, and it comes to them maybe in a way that when they're trying to use an Excel table, it's not working quite right. So let's talk about some of the things that you've got to think about when you're dealing with data that maybe you didn't create. One of the things is you should look to see if the data has limitations. For example, maybe it's old. Maybe you really wanted data that had to do with the donations for the parish or something. But the newest data that you have for whatever that was you were looking for only goes up through last quarter. Well, that's a limitation that you need to note. And if you're giving this to anybody else or a report or something, make note of the fact that the data has that limitation, possibly in terms of the timeliness of it. But also, it could be that there's gaps. Maybe you look through the data and you find out, wow, interesting, everything's here except for July. That kind of thing can happen. So you're looking to see if the data is up to date and also does it have any gaps. Additionally, you're going to look for things like, was the data recorded in a different way? So I've got a little example here, and I said, well, how about this? Maybe up to a certain point, when there was a record that was kept for some kind of a retail theft in a grocery store, the description was written down in the data, grocery food store. But then at a certain point, they changed it and just started writing grocery. When you're doing filtering or even sorting, that's going to be two different things. And so up to a certain point in the data, it would have been written down and noted one way, and then beyond that, a different way. You'll want to note those things before you make a table and start doing sorting and filtering and analysis. Okay, also, sometimes there are things that are unclear. So in this case, there was a retail theft, let's say, and it was in a grocery food store, but also maybe there was something else stolen that was in a different part of the store. Would those be lumped into one record, or would those be written in two different records? So it was one break-in. Is that going to show up once or twice in your data? That kind of thing you'll need to note before you start filtering and getting statistics out of your data. How were things actually recorded? So my first point in terms of data considerations themselves is know your data. You'll need to spend a little bit of time getting familiar with your data. But then the next thing is, before you make a table, you need to clean up that data. So if there are things like here, I've got some duplicates. Those are clearly the same thing, even though this isn't identical. Those are exactly the same thing. I would want to take those duplicates out of there before I made a table. Also, this presumably is supposed to say theft all the way down, and it does not, so there's a gap in my data. I need to make sure that gap is filled in before I make a table. This inconsistency, grocery food store versus grocery, I'll have to clean that up because otherwise my filtering will not pick up some of the things. Similarly, if you have something like this, state, where the user, whoever was entering the data, sometimes put IL, sometimes spelled out Illinois, sometimes has a period in there, sometimes not. That has to be made consistent. Sometimes people refer to this cleanup as massaging the data. And it just means you're making it tidy and consistent so that your sorting and filtering will actually give you correct numbers. Also, I'll show you how to do summary stuff and subtotal kinds of things, especially when we get to the workshop on pivot tables. So if you have, rows that are sitting in the middle of your data for subtotals, you need to get those out of there, or stuff in your table with the sorting and filtering will be thrown off. So this kind of stuff gets removed so that you have simple, consistent, let's say we fix this. One more. Actually, there's more data beyond what we're seeing on the screen, but you get the idea. Clean, tidy data that you understand the limitations of before you make a table. Also, sometimes when you get an export out of a system, no matter what it is, you'll get a file that has this file extension .csv. When you open it, it'll open in Excel. That's called a comma separated value file, a CSV file. But that's not where you want to leave your data. When you're making a table and you're doing some filtering and sorting and so forth, you want to turn right around and save as, and save that file as an Excel file. It has an extension XLSX, not the CSV. That one you can set aside as being your original data. But what you're going to work with is something that you've done a save as and saved as Excel. Two other notes. When you're dealing with data like this and you're going to come back to it and do different filtering, you want to have a backup of your data. That's not just something that you leave on the desktop and then when the laptop or the computer dies, it's gone. Make sure that you have a backup of your important data. And the other note is don't keep sensitive data. So if for some reason there's a CSV file that a vendor sent you, let's say, and it has data in there, let's hope not, but let's say social security number or credit card information or something that's just absolutely not what you want on your system, that you're going to reject that even before they try to send you that. You don't need that. You don't want to keep that. You don't want to have the responsibility of maintaining that data. So don't even keep that in your table. Okay. Let's take a look now at actually having some values like a totals row or averages or counts and that sort of thing. Let's go over to sheet 5 and take a look at that. First of all, let me make this a table. We'll pick the next color. Okay. And let's talk about what you would do if you needed to add something to this table. So you have another row that you want to add. Well, we don't need to come up here and insert a row somewhere alphabetically because our sorting is driven by the table's sorting features. All you need to do is come to the very last cell on this table and tab. Notice how it continued sort of that yellow border that allows me to know, oh, good. Excel understands I'm still typing in this table. So I'm going to put in some kind of fictitious information here for a new record. Oops, 017. Oops, I should have just done that. Okay. And I don't know, it was $20 and it was a theft and it was the 500 and under and it was a street. Okay. Oh, actually, I shouldn't have done the very last additional row. I wanted to stop there. At this point, if I want it sorted by cost or anything else, I would use the sorting features of the table. I'm always just going to add the next available record to the bottom and then sort after that. But what about making average, sum, count, these kinds of summaries of your data at the bottom of this table? Well, there's more than one way to do it, but if you're on the Home tab, what you're going to look for, because I took you out of it so I could show you back where it is, a Design tab. So this is a Table Tool Design tab. This is one way to do this. You can select Total Row, and now it put a new row at the bottom that kind of has a double border above it. It put a count right here on the right-hand side. And here, I can go over here and pick the drop down and say what I want. I think I want for my summary here, a sum. Then, and this is really neat, when you do filtering, let's filter this on just cybercrime instead of theft. Okay, so here's my cybercrime kinds of stuff. Here's the total for that filtered view. Now, I don't want that. Let's just look at the thefts. There's the total just for thefts, and so on. So whatever filtering you're doing, your total row will reflect those subtotals. All right. Another thing that I want to show you is what if you actually wanted to add another column. So this is a common thing, and you can't just click anywhere and add a column. You need to make sure that Excel understands you're adding a table column. In other words, you're extending this table. I'm going to right-click up in one of these column headings, say Insert, and I'll say a table column to the left. What you're looking for is for it to say table column. So I can see that it's yellow, it's got its little drop-down arrow, and I have now added a table column. I'll rename this column, and I'm going to make this up and just say that we actually get some, we've gotten some things back that were stolen. How much of this cost in terms of what was stolen got restored to the person who lost the money or the belonging. And I want to use this to demonstrate what math looks like when you're in a table. So it's a little bit different. I'm going to say that in each of these cases, 40% of what they lost came back to them, was restored. So whenever you're doing math in Excel, you're going to start with an equal symbol. And then I'm going to click on this cell because I'm going to multiply this by 40%. Take a look at what happens here. This is going to look a little different. Do you see that? It doesn't say E2. If we were outside of a table and I did this math, it would just say E2. But in this case, it's in a table, so it's referring to basically the cost column. And now when I do a little math here, I'm going to do asterisk, meaning times 0.40. That's 40%. And I'm going to press enter. Watch what happens. The whole column gets that math. So when you're dealing with a table and you need to calculate something, it automatically says, oh, that's what this whole column is all about, and it does it all the way down the column. So here's another thing I want to show you, and this works whether you're in a table or not, but it's very helpful. I have this sum function here at the bottom of this column. I could do the same thing here with the drop down and say average or sum or minimum or maximum or even count, although I have a count over here, which is helpful. But what I want to show you is a lot of times the fastest thing is to grab this little corner in the lower right hand corner and drag it. That's called a handle, and I've drug that over here, and so it copied the sum function for me across. If you had a whole bunch of numbers, you could just click here and drag all the way across to copy that function across to any columns that you needed it. Okay, so I'm basically out of time, but there's two extras that I want to show you real quick, and that is sometimes when you've created a table, you need to turn around and get it back out of the table format. And so I want to show you where that is. Let me come into sheet 6 here and just show you what that looks like. I'm going to go up on the tabs to the Design tab. So I have my cursor inside the table. I clicked on the Table Tools Design tab, and I'm going to say Convert to Range. It says, do you want to convert this to a normal range? Yes. Now, it still looks pretty, but you're not in the table anymore. So sometimes you need to do that. That's where it is, on the Design tab. Last thing I want to show you. I'm going to use sheet 7 to show you this thing. When you're dealing with a table, if your cursor is in a table somewhere, you can add something to your sheet that's very helpful called a slicer. This could be particularly helpful if you're going to turn around and give your Excel file to somebody else who isn't that familiar with tables and sorting and filtering. So with my cursor in the table, I'm going to say Insert, Slicer, and I could pick any one of these. This is going to give me a little tool to allow me to filter so easily. I'll pick Description and say OK. Now this, you can put it somewhere convenient, but this now allows you to filter just by these choices over here. So you could create a slicer for somebody, send them the file, and they could just click here and get the answers that they need without being sophisticated in Excel at all. Thank you for watching this video.